Hey everyone, I'm Sarah from Sourdough for Beginners. I'm going to go through rehydrating a dehydrated starter today. I'm going to use some dehydrated mama. I sell dehydrated starter on sourdoughforbeginners.com and on Etsy. So we're going to use the instructions that I send. When you order mama, you get 15 grams of dehydrated starter and you get your instructions. And all you need in addition to that is a jar, which I want to tell you about, and some flour and water. In regards to flour, you can use any flour that you like. I'm just using regular all-purpose flour, but you can use bread flour, wheat flour, rye flour, organic flour, anything you like, and you can mix and match flours and change them around as you go, and that might even help to strengthen your starter. In regards to a jar, we are firm believers in a tightly sealed lid. All of our starters are thriving in a tightly sealed lid environment, so all that we suggest is that you have quite a large jar. Mine are 750 milliliters, 3 cups. I can, in my Amazon storefront, I'll link that soon. You can find these. There's a 30 pack of these for, I don't know, $10 or so. But these are just rescue deli containers. You can usually get them at the grocery store. And the only other thing that I would say is before you begin this process, weigh your jar and jot down on the side of the jar or somewhere where you're always going to be able to find it what the jar with the lid off weighs. And the reason I say that is because once we get to day 4, we're going to start discarding the starter. And if you remember what the weight of your jar was, then it makes it a lot easier to discard. So you'll see that come up again on day 4 when we're feeding. In fact, it's day 4 now, and I realized that I didn't say that at the beginning on day 1. So I came and recorded this, and I'm just going to stick it in an order. So let's get started. You've got the starter now, it's arrived. So when you get it from me, it'll come like this in a little Ziploc bag. It's all dehydrated and ground up, and you get 15 grams. And then it also comes with these instructions on how to rehydrate it. So what I'm gonna do is rehydrate one of my starters over the next few days and show you day by day what to do. So day 1's pretty simple. Let's just get set up here so that we can see what we're working with. Okay. So what I've got is the jar that I'm going to use for my starter. It's just, a basic deli container. I think this one had pickles in it. I buy these off of Amazon. You can use any jar as long as it's big enough once your starter starts growing for it to at least triple. We recommend a tightly sealed lid with a starter. And so as long as your jar is nice and big, I recommend 750 mils or 3 cups or even a liter or a gallon jar, just to give you lots of room for the starter to activate. So I'm just going to stick my jar on my scale and tare my scale to 0. Now, what we're going to do is dump this whole entire starter right into the jar. Right. So there we go. I've got my scale tared back to 0 with the starter in there. So what day 1 it calls for in the instructions is to add 45 grams of water, or if you don't have a scale, to do a quarter of a cup. We're just going to stir it up a little bit, and then we're going to let it sit for a day or 2 until it's completely cooked. So I'll show you how to do this. So we just want to add 45 grams of water. So I'm just going to pour the 45 grams of water in. And it's not very much water at all. So there we go. That's 47, but that'll be okay. So what you've got is this sort of gritty, chunky sort of mix. And the starter is going to take somewhere between 1 to 2 days to dissolve. So we're not going to do the day 2 or step 2, day 3 next step until we've got this fully dissolved. So all we're going to recommend is that you keep your lid on. And over the next 24 hours or so, just keep looking at this and, swish it around. You know what I mean? You can check on it over the next day or so. And once you get to a point where the starter is fully dissolved, so see how right now it's sort of starter down here and water sitting on top of it. Once that starter fully dissolves, then we'll move on to the next step in rehydrating the starter. This starter should rehydrate within 4 days. It wakes up really fast. Mama's super excited. So I will come back and see you when we're ready to do the next step, which is either tomorrow or the next day. Talk to you soon. Bye. Hey everyone, I'm Sarah from Sourdough for Beginners. So it's day 3 with our rehydrating of our starter. So this is Mama, and when you order some dehydrated starter from us off of sourdoughforbeginners.com or Etsy, you get the little dehydrated pack. I showed you those 2 days ago. So it's day 3 now, and the starter's pretty much dissolved. If I leave it sitting on the counter, it sort of separates and gives you like a layer of water on top and a layer of paint looking stuff on the bottom. So you can see it's kind of like just liquid. So what we're going to do today is give it its first feed. It might even double after this first feed, but then tomorrow we'll discard and we'll feed it again. And by then it should be reactivated and then you're ready to go to bake. So I'm just going to zoom in a little closer so you can see the refeed. Okay, so day 3 calls for 60 grams of flour and 60 grams of water. So I've just got my starter jar on the scale. I've tared it to 0, and I'm just going to scoop in 60 grams of flour. Now, if you don't have a scale, then it's half a cup of flour and a quarter cup of water. So here we go. Get this in. So we've got 60 grams of flour and 60 grams of water. So what you have here now is a total of 180 grams of starter. So you had 15 grams of dehydrated, 45 grams of water brought you to 60 grams, and then you fed it 60 grams of flour and 60 grams of water. We're going to let this sit for 24 hours. It might double tonight, but we want to give it one good discard and refeed before we say that it's ready to go to bake with. So tomorrow we will discard all the way back to 60 grams. So we'll take 120 grams out and then we'll feed it 60 grams of flour and 60 grams of water. Once we get it activated tomorrow or the next day, then we'll talk about how you can manage it going forward. A little hard to see here. I'll show you when I record day 4, but overnight after day 3, the starter started to activate a little. You can see that the lid is puffed up and we're getting bubbly at the bottom, so that's a great sign. Okay, so in the intro video where we talked about the supplies you were going to need, I told you to weigh your jar with the lid off and note that. That's going to really help you today. What we want to do is discard back to 60 grams. So we just want to leave 60 grams behind in the jar. And if you know what your jar weighs, then you can easily discard back to 60 grams plus the weight of the jar, right? So say your jar weighs 75 grams, then you can use your scale to get your jar back to 75 grams plus 60. Alternatively, I'm going to do it another way. You can actually discard out the amount that you know you need to take out. So we had 180 grams in this jar. We want to get back to 60. So I'm going to discard 120 grams into this bowl. So I'm just going to tare the scale to 0 and get onto grams. And then I'm just going to dump 120 grams of flour into this bowl. So here it is, super bubbly, but very watery. Once this doubles once and activates, I will show it to you, and then I'm going to talk about getting your starter stabilized. So for now, I'm just going to pour out 120 grams of starter and leave only 60 behind. Just let this go. So the reason that a starter, it gets watery is because it is fermenting very quickly and going to the alcohol phase of fermentation, right? So the way that we can stabilize our starter is just to give it a flour heavy feed. Sourdough discard can be used in lots of different ways. Definitely check out the discard playlist on our on the YouTube channel, and also the starter playlist, which starts to get more in depth into managing your starter. I would just throw this first discard away because it's not completely active yet, but once your starter is activated, you can start saving that discard to use in discard recipes. So we've got 60 grams of starter left in here. And now what we're going to do is give it 60 grams of flour, which I've already pre-measured, and 60 grams of water, and stir it up. So here we go. So I think that today this starter is going to double and be fully activated because it comes from my starter, Mama, which is a very, very active starter. I nurture it, right? It's very active. And so I am finding, and I'm getting feedback from people who are ordering it, that the starter is activating basically on the second feed. So day 4 or right. So I believe that this is going to double today, which means that technically we can bake. You then, once this starter is doubled, can do a couple of things. First of all, you can stabilize the starter so that it doesn't go to alcohol by giving it a flour heavy feed. So perhaps you might give it like 75 grams of flour and the 60 grams of water at your next feed just to get it thicker, right? And then just discard back to 60 grams every day. The other thing is that you can start adjusting your feeding ratio to suit how you're going to bake. So for example, if your recipe calls for 100 grams of starter, at your next feed, you could discard back to 50 grams and feed it 50 grams each of flour and water. And then you've got 100 to take out for your bread, right? So on and so forth. If you need 200 grams, discard back to 100 grams, feed it 100 each of flour and water. Then you've got 200 grams to use for your recipe and that 100 grams to leave behind. So those are fairly simple things that you can do. But stabilizing your starter and making sure that it's nice and even is a good idea. So you don't want your starter to be super watery. This is my active starter. And if you look, it's thin enough that it can move. So it's definitely not a dough consistency, but I would say it is much thicker than pancake mix. So what I would suggest is if your starter is showing up as watery, so this one's not super watery, but it's a little bit there, just thicken it up with a little bit of flour. So if this doubles today, I will snap some pictures and then come back on and show it to you. If it doesn't, then we'll do one more day of feeding and see how long this actually takes to rehydrate. I'll talk to you soon. So you just saw the photo. The starter doubled yesterday. So we're on day 5. And just like the instructions say, and like I suspected, the starter doubled. So that means it's ready to go. It's an active, established starter, so you don't need to discard and feed for several days to make sure it's okay. You can actually use it. But what I do suggest, and this is optional, is that you give it a nice flour heavy feed today. So just get it stabilized. It starts off kind of liquidy, so I'll show you how it looks right now. It did fall after it doubled, but I had that picture posted. So very bubbly, very active, but quite thin. So today I'm going to give it a 75 gram flour feed and only a 60 gram water feed after I discard the 120 grams. It's going to throw my weight out a little bit, but it's really going to stabilize this, this starter. So I'm just going to adjust the camera so you can see how we do it. So first I'm going to discard 120 grams out of this jar. I'm going to leave 60 grams behind. So we'll just get rid of that. Technically, this discard is ready to use. So you could put it in, a cookie recipe or bagels or English muffins, whatever you like. I've got a couple of discard recipe ebooks on sourdoughforbeginners.com and on Etsy. The ultimate guide to active and discard starter recipes, and then the next ultimate guide. So if you're interested in making discard recipes, I've got you covered there. So here we go. We're not leaving a lot behind. That's 60 grams. And now we're going to give it a nice flour heavy feed. So there's our discard. And like I said, you can keep that and bake with it if you like. So I'm going to tare my scale to 0. And I'm going to give this starter 75 grams. So what I'm doing is mixing it up nice and thick. Right, the beginner bread recipe, which I will link, is calls for 120 grams of active starter. So this is going to make it so that when you go to bake, so technically today after this doubles in 3 or 4 hours, I could mix and bake the beginner bread recipe. Although for timing, we suggest with the beginner bread recipe, you feed your starter before bed, leave it sitting out on the counter, mix early in the morning, and then you can actually watch it through the day. Especially for your very first loaves, we suggest that you set it up so that you're able to keep an eye on the bulk proofing stage as it goes. So the way this is set up, you'll be able to take your 120 grams for the beginner bread recipe out and have enough left over to refeed. So I'm just going to put a little less water in today. I put 75 grams of flour in, and now I'm going to put 60 grams of water in. So as your starter ages, you know, as you're using it, you're going to really be able to adjust how you feed it. You know what I mean? You're going to figure out how much starter you need every day. Maybe you're just making a single loaf of the beginner bread recipe, so you only need 60 grams. Maybe you're making a single loaf of the level 2 hydration recipe that's on the YouTube channel. I'll link that as well. So you need 100 grams every day. Maybe you're making the full batch, so you need 120 or 200. You can adjust your starter as you go to suit that. So I'm just going to finish getting this mixed up, and then I'm going to show you the consistency and then show you the discard so that you can see the difference for this feed. And like I said, this should double today in, 3 to 5 hours, and then would technically be ready to use. So here it is. I'll bring it in closer. So it's quite thick, right? It's like, I would say it's almost thicker than peanut butter, right? Very thick compared to our discard, which you could pour, right? Liquid, absolutely. So you don't have to have a thicker starter. This liquid starter would absolutely work. You can use a liquid thin starter. That is absolutely an option. It does work. There's nothing wrong with that. But I do just find that you get this very strong sour taste because it's very alcohol. So to be able to stabilize that starter is a great idea. So definitely check out the description of this video. I'll link all of the sort of next steps. If you bought Mama off of Etsy, then your instructions have QR codes that'll bring you to the next steps for learning to bake and everything else. Say hi in the comments and maybe let me know how many days your Mama starter took to reactivate. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all soon. Bye now.